Hey, welcome to Wine Talks with Paul K. And we are in beautiful Southern California today, a beautiful day here in Monrovia. About to have a podcast up in San Francisco with Cecily Gamba. Introductions in just a second. Wine Talks, of course, available on iHeartRadio, Pandora, Spotify, wherever you hang out for podcasting, and sponsored by the Original Wine of the Month Club, now sporting the Napa Sonoma series of wines. But not while we're here. Hey, before we get on to that, we have a great show coming up in Anarato, and she was the winemaker in Ramos Pinto in Portugal. It's a fascinating conversation, a lot of port to talk about. Have a listen to that when it comes out. But not why we're here today. Here to have a conversation with Cecily Gamba of Gamba Winery, I guess, right?
Yeah, that's correct.
So she's a somm, she's a Witset level 3, she's a wine influencer. Under the handle, You Had Me at Bordeaux, which we were just talking about. Would you tell me how you got that? Because you don't make Bordeaux, you don't live in Bordeaux, you like champagne, but you...
Right, right. Just a fan. But no, so it actually came about when I decided to start a wine Instagram. It kind of came more from the love of photography and the love of sharing knowledge about wine. And I kind of thought it would just be something where, my sister and I get to take fun photos and my friends would follow and, we'd get to learn a little bit about wine and, it'd just be something fun for me to do. And so I was thinking about a name and, there's You Had Me at Merlot and I was like, nah, but then You Had Me at Bordeaux. And I thought that's kind of fun and catchy and a little bit different. And so really without thinking about it, just took the Instagram handle and after a while it actually started to take off and it became part of the identity. And, I was going to events and, people would say, oh, are you Had Me at Bordeaux? And, it just became part of my brand and I love it. And I love Bordeaux wines and I love to learn about them and to drink them, but it doesn't make the content exclusively about that. And it's just become something that's become part of my identity over the years.
That's so interesting because I was trying to, this morning I got up and I was preparing to have our conversation and I thought, Bordeaux, isn't it? But You Had Me at Hello. Is that from Casablanca? I can't remember. One of those
Right.
romantic comedies from back in the day.
Right.
And I
Yeah.
couldn't remember what it is, but it's,
I think there's been so many spin-offs, in terms of like wine phrases and things like that. So, you have a lot of people have gotten really creative. So,
yeah, it's
you
true.
know,
Well,
yeah.
you said something interesting, and that's about, learning about wine and starting this Instagram handle and using the term You Had Me at Bordeaux. But
Mhm.
I have found recently, and now that I think about back on it, I have doing these podcasts, I've learned more having these conversations with people like you than all the 30 years of tasting that I've encountered. And I'm wondering if you've had the same experience now that you're an influencer working in the wine
Mhm.
trade, that all of a sudden these conversations peel back a little more.
Right. No, absolutely. And I think that's one of the best things about wine too is that it's just how much more than a beverage it is. It's these people's stories, it's people's lives, it's their passions. And, you can read all you want in a book and you can, taste all the wines in the world, but really talking to the people and finding out all that's gone into it and, their family history with wine and growing and, agriculture, language, food, it gets into so many different things. And I think it's just, like you said, the best way to learn about wine and to really appreciate it to its fullest.
And we're going to talk about your family winery and the history, the seventh generation, which is a phenomenal feat in this industry anywhere in the world, let alone America, which is barely has seven generations worth to talk about. But I want to talk a little bit about your philosophy about wine and the things you
Sure.
talk about and you preach as an influencer. And I was reading some of your articles, and you talk about, well, one, you talk about champagne as your go-to drink, and that's a fabulous thing, by the way.
It's true. I mean, do you turn down a glass of bubbles that are, from champagne? I mean, it's hard to do.
It'd be hard to do, and I think I just
Yeah,
mentioned I had Clovis Tétanger on the show yesterday, or the day
that's so
before, and
cool.
we were talking about the idea that champagne should be and could be just part of the regular. It doesn't have to be champagne, of course. It's an expensive habit, which I
Right.
turned my son-in-law onto, which is a huge mistake. But
Oh boy.
yeah, so but the idea of sparkling wine in your regular regiment of consumption is, I think, a very valid thing.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I think also you know, same with a lot of wine, not just champagne, but especially champagne. I think people think that they need to wait till that perfect moment to open the bottle or,
Hmm.
oh, we have a celebration, so we'll get champagne, and that's one of the things too that I like to tell people, it's whatever day, having a meal with your friends is a celebration, open that special bottle of wine, you're having, a certain meal, champagne goes with that meal, and so just kind of taking away that idea that, you know, wine can't be opened, at a certain point, or, we can't drink champagne every day, which maybe not every day, but, that it needs to be reserved for these special times is, something that life's too short to, I think like that.
Well, philosophically, you would say that every glass is a celebration of where you're at and what you're doing. And so,
Exactly, exactly.
it doesn't. If you're going to open a bottle of Dom or spend $200 on a bottle of Cristal or something, I guess that's different. But as far
Maybe,
as
yeah. Or, you could be waiting for the perfect day and you may never think that day is perfect enough. And then you kind of, wine is a living thing. It dies off after a while. And so, I think some people are like, I can't open that bottle yet, but open that
it's
bottle.
for
It's
drinking,
yeah, it's for drinking. It's a drink.
nothing pains me more than if somebody asks me to evaluate their cellar or something. I'll go to their house and it's like, oh my gosh, why didn't you drink this? What's the point
That's
of
the
hanging on to it
thing.
except to
Yeah, I
say you
think
have it?
people are waiting for that perfect moment, but
Yeah.
that perfect moment could be today, and maybe it's not the, day you'll remember forever, because maybe nothing extraordinary happened that day, but the fact that we're alive and here is extraordinary.
I
So
think
just
that's
celebrate it.
a great viewpoint. And I went immediately home after the podcast and had a glass of Tétanger Rosé, and that was fabulous. And I put
Excellent.
another one in the refrigerator to make sure it was available for tonight. So that's why
I
that's how I
love that.
always
You know
do.
what? That's something I always do have. I have an emergency bubbles in my fridge
Right.
because you never know. You never know when you're going to need it.
It's
So,
you always need it. It's like when
you
you can open it.
yeah, exactly.
Actually, one of the things I brought up, and maybe you've seen this, is I've seen a lot of new districts across the world coming out with their rosés, for instance. And so you're seeing rosé from Tuscany, you're seeing rosé from Croatia, and you're seeing rosé from all these
Yeah.
lesser known regions of the world that grow wine. But I'm also
Yeah.
seeing that in the sparkling wine world. I
Yeah.
just had an Argentinian method champenois, Blanc de Blanc, and I thought, wow,
Yeah.
okay, this is interesting. They're all trying to express themselves through sparkling.
Right. Yeah. I think that's really interesting as well. I was just teaching a class on sparkling. And, I think that we have our tried and trues. We have the champagne, we have, Cremants from the rest of France. And, we have even American sparkling wine
Hmm.
that, ones from California we can kind of count on for certain characteristics. But I think it's so fun now to be able to experiment with sparkling and, try all these, different varietals and different, ways people are making them. I think it's awesome.
I want you to venture into a wine called Kush, Keush. Have you had it? It's a sparkling from Armenia.
Yes, I actually have. I
Wow.
worked with someone in New York who carried it, and it's a very interesting one.
Oh, yeah. Method Champenois, it's like, what, $19 or something? I mean,
Right. Yeah. I
it's,
mean, that's the thing too. It's like, and I always tell people too, looking at cava and,
mm-hmm.
it's made in the same way as champagne and often a really great alternative. So I think there are, lots of options too. If, you know, a lot of times we, like you said, if we're not going to be going buying $200 Dom, every day. But there can be sparklings out there that are very, affordable and
Mm-hmm.
approachable. And I think it's awesome that these people are creating that for us.
Have you had the English sparklers?
I have, yeah, a little more zippy, a little,
Mm-hmm.
bright, and I totally fun.
Because I was Monsieur Tétanger was saying that they're the first French winery to invest in property in
Right.
the south of England or the Sussex area.
Yeah.
And
I think it's somewhere to definitely keep an eye on in the coming years.
so when you teach these classes, what in the broader sense of wine consumption and wine appreciation, what is the message you try to get across to your I guess clients or students?
Right. You know, the main thing I think is just that wine can be approachable and it is for everyone. I think that a lot of times people look at wine and think that's a hobby for someone that's older, wealthier,
Hmm.
with more knowledge. And, a lot of times, a lot of my friends and peers will, ask me questions about wine, and people want to know about wine. And, I think that it's an intimidating thing. And I want to dispel that intimidation because at the end of the day, it's a beverage and it comes down to what you like, honestly. And I want people to feel like they can say that they like a wine, whether it's, $150 or $15. And it's up to your own palate. And I want people to not be afraid to say what they like and to try wine and to try and experiment with it because, it's not the first thing I think sometimes people reach for just because of that intimidation. And I want to just try and dispel that.
Are you a millennial?
I am.
No, I didn't. I meant that as a compliment.
Okay. You never know.
Because that's a fascinating approach to the idea. Wine, I think wine is intimidating to people
Yeah.
because I'm not sure there's a way to simplify it, but it's complicated, and that's the pursuit of the knowledge. And you and I
Right.
do this every day. We're never going to run out of things to learn, so that's not a
Right.
valid reason not to try. And so you
Absolutely.
continue to read and taste and do things to just expand your palate. And I read that you want to practice tasting. It's like it's important.
Hmm.
Like you said, you read a lot of books, but until you put that in the glass and start having that conversation.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, and that's part of what I was saying too, just that, you have to find out what you like and you have to be not afraid to say what you like. And that comes with tasting. And, it's not the worst thing to learn about, it's definitely, a fun thing to have to do. So if you want to learn about wine, and tasting it and, like we said, too, learning about the stories behind it, because I think with that comes a little more appreciation with where
Hmm.
your product is coming from and what you actually have in your glass, versus maybe some other beverages where you may not have that. And I think it does make it special and unique.
And it's going to change, right? I mean, what one of your students likes today or finds appealing. Let's say it's 19 crimes. That'll change. We hope it changes. But you said something
Yeah,
about
yeah. But at the same time too, if that's what you like and you're, willing to continue to learn and grow and try, and this is what is your, gateway wine, then so be it. I'm just glad you're here and drinking wine.
I like that term, gateway wine.
Yeah,
Because
yeah,
we've had them throughout the years. In the '70s, we had Sutter Home White Zinfandel was the gateway wine for a lot of people. So now,
yeah.
and I think it's an important part of what you and I do. But it's an
Right.
important thing that you talk about in one of the articles I read about you, which is the sort of practicing to do it. And I thought back, it's kind of like yoga. When the
Hmm.
yoga teacher tells you be present today. I'm like, shut up. I'm just trying to exercise. But but be present in your practice. It's
Right.
it's like learning a language where you can listen to a language in your radio in the background and not learn a thing, but you have to sort of actively listen and actively participate in trying to
Yeah.
learn. And
Yeah,
I think the same as
absolutely.
with wine, right? You taste a wine and you try
Yeah.
to have this conversation with somebody who's like, I taste something.
Right. Exactly. And you know what? Growing up in this industry too, when I first really started tasting and, trying to identify, flavors and aromas and all of that, I remember my dad telling me, once you taste more wines, it'll become more apparent, it'll become easier. And I remember thinking, like, how, I don't, if it's not apparent to me right now, how will it? But it
Hmm.
is true. Once you, kind of start identifying them and then you recognize them in wines, and it does become more apparent with practice. And it's like anything, you stretch and use those muscles, you use these muscles too, and it only gets better.
It's a good point. There's just certain biology to this, right? A
Yeah,
physiology to it.
exactly. Yeah.
That's interesting because one of my stories, I had some friends who are huge Napa cab drinkers, and they always get mad at me for bringing this up, but I don't mention any names. So,
Anonymous.
so we are at Club Pegasa, and there were two cabs in front of us, same vintage, different vineyards. And my friend says, I think it's BS what you guys do when you talk about wine. I'm like, what do you mean? He's like, well, you say this, you taste like that, and you smell. I go, okay, let's break it down. I said, you have two Cabernets in front of you. Are they the same? And he said, no. I said, explain to me what the difference is. And he goes, well, I really can't. I go, but you noticed the difference. I said, okay. So the difference is I can explain it, or at least I can try to explain it.
Right.
And so thus starts the roller coaster of trying to figure this out, right?
Yeah, it's interesting because that's how my dad taught me too. He said, okay, let's start broad. Is it a, blueberry in there that you're smelling, or is it, a banana, and you go from there. You don't have to start with like, oh, this is, something very specific, which I think is part of that intimidation too. Because I think when people think that they are tasting wine, they think they have to get into all these specifics. And I get, a small note of, cigar box that was built in, whatever. And you don't have to start that way. You start broad, and then work your way down. And that's really where you start to find those differences and find which difference you like. That's what it, comes down to as well. I think people think there's a right and a wrong. And, it's more about identifying the flavor and then saying, oh, I like this one. I'm going to pursue wines that taste like this, and so it is interesting how people do think it's like, something that we're just making up or, being all hoity-toity about. But it's like it with anything too, you taste different foods, you see what you like. And, if you have pizza, it's all pizza, but you have different toppings, different flavors, different people who make it in different ways. It's like that as well. So
that's a great analogy, actually.
Yeah.
Well, it's true though, right? People will describe a pizza. They'll have a margarita pizza down the street, San Francisco, a great pizza, and then go somewhere else and say, I don't like it. Well, why?
Yeah,
well, because
exactly.
it's too bitter.
Living in New York for only a year, I know there's differences between pizzas. So
well, and I guess that kind of deals with texture as well, not just flavors like I smell cake spice or whatever, but pizza. Some pizza dough is doughy and some of it's crisp, and so I see you can say that about a wine, right? It feels heavier on my tongue or lighter. That's an interesting thought. Do you preach that in your class about sort of along your food trail to even have those conversations?
Yeah, I think food and wine have so many things that they, cross paths on, and they're so important to each other. Something though that I do tell people in terms of learning to taste is, go to a farmer's market and smell those fresh fruits, smell and taste what everything tastes like. And that way you can also apply that to what you're smelling in the wine. And, there are so many crossovers, and then you get into the way that, when you're pairing food and wine, how it can change the wine and the food. And it's just so interesting and exciting to me that I hope that I pass that on to whoever I'm talking to as well.
Well, if you don't bring it up, they're never going to pass it on, right?
It's true. So you have to bring it up.
Nothing ventured, nothing gained.
Have to talk about wine.
Since we were talking about millennials, I have 3 daughters that are millennials. Okay, so I'm just teasing.
No,
But what's interesting about it, the reason I brought it up is that the other day I don't know, maybe it was Gary Vee or somebody, I can't remember who I was watching, but they were talking about using terms like, Crafton Crunch and Fruit Loops and some more contemporary flavor profiles that maybe the traditionalists of my father would never have used. Maybe your father, your grandfather were like, what are you talking about?
Yeah.
But that's sociologically, that's the way we're at, right? So everybody's generation has its own reference points.
Right.
And there's nothing wrong with that.
No, yeah. And that's the thing too. Like, again, I don't want someone to not feel like they can't, they can't drink or describe or enjoy wine just because they say something that they're afraid they'll sound stupid, and if they want to describe the wine like Fruit Loops, I get it. I get what you're saying. That, maybe, okay, what do we think that comes down to? Maybe a more cherry note, something like that. But if you start there, then you've started at a point and you have something to go off of.
That's
and you
right.
have, something to dig deeper into. And I see no problem with that.
Or there's a silly rabbit, behind. I don't know.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Then you get a little questionable. Maybe you had too much wine then.
We were at the market the other day. I was trying to do a TikTok video and trying to get kicked out. Actually, I was hoping that I could videotape the wine manager of the market to say, "Hey, get out of here! What are you doing?" It didn't happen. But there's a woman came in and I'll net this out. She looked at me and I said, "What are you looking for?" And she said, "I'm looking for something other than I usually drink." I go, "That's kind of
Okay.
cool." And I
Yeah.
said, "What do you usually drink?" She said, "J-Lo or Cabernet." I said, "Well, we got a lot of choices here." And I pointed a few things out. She didn't buy anything I recommended, even though at that time, by then, I suggested I was in the industry. But
Right.
what was an important lesson to my social network coordinator was I said, "You saw two things really important here. One is that somebody was trying to expand their palate,
Right.
which is really
Yeah.
cool. And the
Really
other
cool.
was it's such an emotional decision that even
Yeah.
somebody recommending it in that circumstance she just didn't sit well with it, so she left without anything.
Hmm.
That wine is that way. So what do you recommend to your students that they go to the market? You must be intimidated, as I am, sort
Yeah.
of not intimidated,
Of
but
course.
confused
Yeah.
when you look at this huge wall and everything's got a shelf talker on it.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it is intimidating. There's no doubt. There's no getting around it. It's again, it's like anything where, you have your favorite ice cream flavor and you think, oh, maybe I'll try a different one today. But you know that one ice cream flavor you love and it's tried and true. But I always tell people wanting to learn about and try new wines, I
Hmm.
recommend that they go into a wine shop because the people who work in there really want to help you. Like she was lucky you were there and you're very experienced and knowledgeable about what's on the shelf. But I really recommend people go into a wine shop and talk to the people there because that's what they're there for. They know all the wines on their shelves and they know if you like
Hmm.
this, you might like this. And so I think it is important to talk to an expert, and it's the same, that's what they're there for, is I guess what I'm trying to say. And from there, you can learn, oh, I do like this varietal. Then the next time you can go into a supermarket and see it on the shelf, try that one. Um, but I think it is important to utilize people who do know, I don't think there's anything wrong with that.
Well, I think that you hit it right on the head. That's kind of what you have to do. Because if I walk into Ralph's Market and I see this, literally every wine the other day had a shelf talker, which is
Right,
to the listener is just one of those tags that tells you the price and possibly a score or two.
right,
And now you're confused. And one thing that I've just came to realize really through the point system. Some stores put 90 points, but
right.
if you're a point buyer, like, oh, I only buy 95 points or better, it doesn't help that much because I
Yeah,
just had a Canary Islands, Listan Negro or something like that, and it was fabulous wine. It had like 92
sounds
points.
awesome. Yeah.
But if you like that, and then you buy a 92 point Napa Cab, you're going to say, I'm not sure that I care for this. So the point system's
Right.
kind of weird that
Yeah,
way.
you do have to be a little wary if you're going to be shopping off of points because you're also going off of what
Hmm.
someone else's palate is telling you is good. And generally they are experts. They will tell you if it is a good representation of that wine, but your palate will be different from theirs and you may not agree, and that's okay. But I think that you need to go into points saying, is this is an indication of good representation of this wine, rather than this is a wine I will love because it has 90 whatever points. So um like I said, I think talking to people who know the wines and who know what the experience of tasting that wine is like is something important to do if you want to branch out. And it's fun to go in and talk to people about something they love and something they're passionate about and learn something new. I mean, as someone who was on the other side of that working in a retail shop, that's what we like to
Hmm.
do.
Hmm.
So um,
I think that's
that's what I recommend.
a very important comment, actually. And it's not. And by the way, it's not that the Ralph's market guy doesn't know, because many of those larger
No,
supermarket
yeah,
chains have a a shop manager.
right,
In fact, there was
right,
one
of
in
course.
Hermosa Beach. I mean, I tried to hire this woman away. She was so good that
Yeah,
she knew. I watched her, guide people through the process of choosing a wine
right.
and
Well, yeah, same
avoiding
thing
Cali
there.
Red. Yeah, it's important. I
Same
think it's a really
thing
important
there.
part.
If you can get a hold of her and ask her, that's what you should be doing if you want to try a different wine. I mean, it is fun to sometimes go and just say, hey, let's, if it's not too much of an investment or anything, let's try this new one. But if you can get a hold of her and Ralph's, talk to her. That's the best way to do it,
What
you
do you
know.
think of these algorithms that you see on the internet? Do you drink black coffee? Do you salt your food? And do you like mushrooms?
Right.
Helping choose a wine. Do you think it has any value at all?
I think it's a good place to start. Um, if you're just starting out and you do, want to go in that route and maybe, begin your wine tasting journey in that way, I don't think it's a bad place to start. I don't think you should base everything off that. I don't think, if you get this one wine from that quiz, you should go buy a pallet of it, but it's somewhere to start.
I have this sort of, I don't know, philosophical problem with it, but I suppose you're right. If in some points it's somewhere to start.
Yeah.
And
What are your thoughts on it?
well, I had this conversation with a client actually. They're like, well, why would I want to drink the stuff that somebody else thinks I'd like based on a billion different
Right.
touch points when I'm
Right.
looking to find things that I may have never tried before
Yeah.
that would
Yeah.
not make the filter, right?
Right, right. Yeah, no, that makes sense. I guess the way I would look at it though would be from the point of view of just someone starting out, and if they're taking the time to take this quiz and try and find
Hmm.
out what wine they like, I'm just happy they're starting somewhere. So,
That's a
but
good
I
point.
I
That's a
see what
good
you're
point. I
saying.
agree with that. I think it's a really good point that at least they're taking the time to try
Right,
and
right.
and taste, and then they're going to find the part that the part that and you brought it up earlier about somebody's palate and what they like, what they don't like, and that's certainly very important. And our job, I guess, is to guide them to the things that are properly made,
Right,
so that if they
exactly.
don't like it, it's not because there was a flaw and there was something wrong with the wine. It's that they
Hmm.
just don't like Gewürztraminer from Lodi, kind of thing, right?
Exactly,
Right.
exactly.
So I kind of want to shift gears into, and we'll continue to talk about your influence with your clients. But this history, your family history in the Russian River is fascinating. Going back, is it your? I mean, 7 generations. Is that?
So 7 generations go back actually to Italy. So my grandfather on my dad's side came over from Italy in the 40s and came to California. He started in San Francisco and then he started to miss where he came from. So he was born and raised in a small town called Millesimo in northern Italy
Mm-hmm.
and came from a winemaking family. So he was fifth generation. And, so he had been growing grapes and making wine in Italy and his family until he came here.
Which part?
And
Excuse
once
me
he
for
got to
that.
San
What part?
Francisco,
Which
he
part of the
started
north?
to, sorry,
Which part of the north?
Piemonte.
Oh, okay, on the west side. Okay.
Right. But yeah, once he came here, he started to, miss where he came from, and he went up to Sonoma, and it reminded him of northern Italy, the rolling hills and the all the farmland. And he actually met a man named Cesare Barbieri, who was from the same town in Italy that he was from. So they hit it off right away, and Cesare had a vineyard in Sonoma County that he said, are you interested? And my grandfather said, yes, I am interested in purchasing this property from you. But he didn't have, really any money to his name at that point. And so on a handshake, they made a deal saying that my grandfather would pay Cesare back for the vineyard over the course of however many harvests it took. He'd take care of the land, sell the grapes. And um, that's how our my family's
Hmm.
estate vineyard came to be, on a handshake, which I can't even imagine today.
Yeah.
But it's really, really interesting how things were able to kind of get done then. But yeah, so our family vineyard was planted in 1900. So we have over 120-year-old vines there today. Um, and from there, my grandfather passed away when my dad was uh, and my dad started to take over the winery at that point, or the vineyard rather. We didn't have a winery at that point. But then my dad ended up teaching us everything he knew, and we grew up there on that vineyard. And now my brother, sister, and I are seventh generation wine growers.
That's fascinating. I mean, really, in California, to have that generations is, well, most of those generations, those stories have been rife with political issues and infighting and stuff like that. And here you are cruising along, and you really are farmers, right?
Right. Yeah. I mean, that's our whole philosophy at Gamba Vineyards and Winery is that the vineyards really make the wine. So it's important to farm and grow those grapes the way that they need to be treated and handled. So, I mean, farming is of the utmost importance. And that's really, if you ask, my dad and now us, what we do is we farm the land and, take care of those grapes.
And there's something about and I don't even want to say it as the moniker of today's environment, because I'm starting to realize the farming practices that your great grandfather had were organic anyway, right?
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
mean,
I mean, that's something that's really important to us because we've never known anything else. My grandfather taught my dad, all these practices, and that's how he learned, and now we learned from him, and there's really no other way. Especially when you have vines that are 120 years old, they really need that extra organic care and that extra touch and that extra little labor of love. So we really know no other way to do it, and I think it does, um, really show in the final product.
it's kind of frustrating a little bit because something old is something new. And here,
Mm-hmm.
when I taste wines on Tuesdays, I always ask if they're organic or biodynamic just to have it in my notes. But I really shouldn't have to the extent that there shouldn't be a lot of difference in what the profile. Now, if we're talking about formula wines like Apothic Red and Josh and that kind of stuff, that's different. But if you're talking about just from the farm, making it as pure, I don't mean pure from a structural standpoint, but pure as just expression of where it's from,
Right.
wine, you would avoid all those things anyway. You were as a young girl, you were playing in those vineyards, right? Did you want pesticides and herbicides and
Right.
insecticides on your hands?
That is kind of the thing too, it's like my parents say, we're raising our family here. Why would we want that all, around? And I think too, nowadays it's becoming, it's very important for people to consume things that are organic and properly farmed. And wine's no different. I mean, we live in a time too, where I think the wine industry is changing a lot, and you know, there is becoming a bigger gap in ways that wine is farmed and produced. And so again, I think it comes back to having those conversations and learning about where your product is coming from.
Since you had me at Bordeaux. Let's talk about Bordeaux for a second. The great houses, all the classified growths, they're not out there deliberately trying to doctor up their vineyards to. They want to produce a wine as expressive as its history and as where it's coming from. And so the intervention of
Right.
the moniker of organic, that's just a definition that maybe the government sets out. The certification of organic is kind of, you pay money for them to look at what you're
Right.
doing, what you were doing anyway. I mean, that part kind of
Right.
kind of goofy. But don't you want to be as
Yeah.
pure as possible?
Yeah. I do think there is a difference. I don't, again, I think it comes down to just looking into where your product is coming from and talking to people because, my family isn't certified organic, because we're a small family business. It's expensive to have that certification, but it's what we've been doing forever.
Mm-hmm.
So it's difficult because you want to make it easy for your consumer to know, what is going on in your practices. But at the same time, you need to do what's, best for your business and, for you to be able to grow and continue to do things the way that you're doing them. But I mean, for a bigger house in Bordeaux, and if they're able to, put that organic note on their bottle, I think that's great. But I think, like I said, it's important to just look into where your wine is coming from.
It's you made a good point. Uh, since you've been farming this way, you know exactly what this vineyard can produce. You've got a lot of experience
Right.
understanding the different terroir for the season, and there's no reason in the world, in my opinion, that any organic wine should taste like kombucha. And for some reason, the for some reason the current idea that if a wine's organic, it has to have this bizarre character that comes from
Mm-hmm.
whatever practices they're using in these places that make these wines that and it always comes down for me. It first has to be pleasant. Like you have to want to have the
Yeah,
next sip, right?
absolutely.
And you certainly,
Absolutely.
in your family's history will prove that it doesn't have to be this bizarre concoction. It could be just solid
Yeah,
wine, simple wine.
absolutely. And I do think that also maybe comes down to learning the different terminologies, because I think that sometimes natural gets confused with biodynamic, gets
Mm-hmm.
confused with organic, you know. And so I think also just education there can help, because organic doesn't, necessarily mean natural. And I think that a lot of times, you find natural wines that may have that, funky, quality to them. And, I think that just gets sometimes confused with organic. And I also think that, you know, on that same note, not all organic and natural wines are the same. Um, you know, I think there are some beautiful natural wines, some very elegant, clean, well done natural wines. And I think that there are some that are, a little bit more on the funky side. And if that's what you're looking for, great. But I do think it's important to distinguish natural from organic from biodynamic for people, just so that it's not all clumped under one umbrella of, oh, that's just going to be like a funky kombucha wine.
It's funny. You triggered a thought. And how many times you've been to Whole Foods or any organic market, Mrs. Gooch's or whatever it was back then, and bought
Mm-hmm.
carrots and brought them home and going, just they're not very good. They're too bitter. Or there's just because it's organic. And I guess that's the same with wine. We still have to employ proper farming practices and proper vineyard practices and proper manufacturing processes to produce, the
Right.
best example of what our family's about. It has nothing to do with
Of course.
calling it one or the other. In fact, the term
Mm-hmm.
natural wine, if you ever looked it up, there is no such thing. The FDA has never defined that. The FDA has not even defined what
Right.
natural food looks like.
Right. Yeah. Natural is such a funny term.
So it doesn't really work. So this is a question I had when I was reading this, and we were talking about Bordeaux for a second, and
Mm-hmm.
but Zinfandel being,
Mm-hmm.
well, one, the immigration of your family to America, particularly that part of the country for the wine business and being in
Mm-hmm.
the wine trade, is, there were a lot of Italians that came. The Mondavis and
Right.
the well, there's a few others, but that settled there. Is that, you think it's because of the environment, the way it felt? You said it felt like Piemonte to your family.
Right. Yeah. Definitely. And I mean, I think there's no doubt that the growing region here in, Sonoma and Napa is optimal for, this farming of this particular, plant and, you know, uh, grapes. So, I think a mix too, a mix of, this is where I've come from, what I know, what our family's good at, and, it's familiar here. And it is, one of the world's best growing regions here.
So, but my favorite Pinot Noirs from America, my favorite are
Hmm.
Burgundies by expensive habit, but but Russian River makes incredible Pinot,
Can't
and
blame
so
you.
I wouldn't have pointed to Zin as a Russian River sort of, expression, Lodi, Sierra Foothills,
Right.
etc. But how did that happen? Was that what the original farmer was growing?
Yeah. So when my grandfather purchased it, it had, those vines had been there for about, 45 years at that point. But the Rush River Valley, with its cool mornings and its, warmer afternoons,
Mm-hmm.
is really ideal for Zen, that you want to be, have that elegance to it, but still that complexity of flavor. They're not over baked, in the sun all day. They do get that cooling influence at night in order to preserve that acidity. But then it allows us for longer hang times for those sugars to ripen and for those flavors to really develop. So, in the way that the climate is very delicate for Pinot, to allow Pinots to grow and to flourish and survive. that climate in turn, is really good for Zinfandel.
Hmm.
Though we're one of the few planted there, but the vines do really enjoy the climate that we have there.
Well, since I've never had the luxury of tasting a Gamba wine, I expect to happen one of these days. Um,
Yeah,
that
please.
was tongue in cheek, Um, how long have you been making wines, and when did you establish the winery itself after you were farming it all?
Yeah. So, like I said, I grew up on that vineyard. My parents still live there now. So for as long as I can remember, the vines have been harvested and the fruit was sold up until 2000, when my dad had been working for a couple different wineries here in the area, learning and accumulating his knowledge. And in 2000, when my brother and sister were still babies, and even though a lot of people thought they were kind of crazy, my parents decided to start their own company. And they thought, let's do this for ourselves. Let's try and build something. And it was a risk for sure. Their first vintages were hard, and up until now, it was just the two of them. They have some. We have vineyard help, and we have a little bit of sales help, but it was really just the two of them up until I joined. And so it's funny too, because I think a lot of people think winemaking, oh, how cool. Sometimes my dad has said that people have been like, oh, you just drink wine all day, that's awesome. And it's a hard business. It's not
It's
all
very
the
hard.
it's not a glamorous business. So um it's really beautiful to see the way it's grown and what they've been able to achieve now. And it feels like such a gift that I get to work there and continue to help them build it. And I just feel very lucky.
That is a gift, and it is a business. What you just basically said is it requires a lot of passion to produce that, because it is hard work. And it's hard to make money in it. And what this is and I don't know how to put this, because there's no fault of anybody, but the people, I'm trying to be nice. You
Go
can't
ahead.
you can't. There are people that want to buy the lifestyle, right? And
Right.
I'll be honest. I bought 60 acres of potential vineyard land in Paso Robles, and I've sold it as soon as I realized that I'm a lousy farmer. I can't even grow anything, and that's not the lifestyle that I would be comfortable. I grew up at the beach. That's what I do.
Right.
Um,
Right.
but when you make a lot of money in some other industry, and you look at the romanticism, you said it's not a romantic business. You see this romanticism in the customer facing side of the wine business. You go to Napa Valley, you go to the Russian
Right.
River, and you drive around and you see,
Right.
and that's not
Right.
what it is. This
Right.
you
Right.
can't buy it. You have to appreciate it. You have to live it and earn it, really.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I think that like you said, it does look like a beautiful thing, and it is a beautiful thing that we get to do. We do get to pour our passion into a product that we get to share with people over, beautiful times. It's wonderful, don't get me wrong, but it's hard
It's
work,
hard
and
work.
it's farming, and it's a business, and it's something that you do have to be passionate about the entire picture, not just drinking wine. Which I think is something that you don't get to see, when you're just forward facing, with your final product. And but that's what I like to, share with people. I like to share that, it's my dad and I up tasting till midnight to try and get that perfect blend. And it's, going into the winery and, taking count of all the barrels in those early mornings for harvests, and, ship it, going and, doing the shipments ourselves for the club shipments. And,
Hmm. Hmm.
at the end of the day, there's nothing else I'd rather do, because there's nothing else I'd rather be doing it for. I'd want to do it for my family and for the, continuation of wine and, the sharing of that. So, you're right. It's not something that can be purchased, but I do see the appeal.
It's I think of your grandfather's time. It was obviously a very different business. He was farming, he was picking grapes, he was selling them at the right time, and people were making wine out of them. And I had a conversation
Right.
with the beat writer at the Napa Valley Register just before COVID. Actually, COVID was hitting as I met with her, and she said something very poignant. And this is, you just said it. And she said, "Well, what are these small wineries are going to do when there's a lockdown and they don't have a digital presence?" And I thought to myself, "Wow, that's a huge point, because if you're a farmer and you're used to selling your grapes and
Mhm.
you make your wine and people come in the tasting room and they buy the wine and you're actually surviving on this, and then now no one's
Mhm.
coming, and you don't know anything about chatting. I mean, you have a website possibly, but it's not a very
Right.
robust e-commerce site. You've never advertised it. It's really for your current clients
Right.
to know where." And I thought, well, that's a whole piece of information that an otherwise farmer would have to learn, and it's not easy. It's really not that easy. I
Right.
mean, you have a club, that's not
No,
easy. You have to learn how to
absolutely.
pack and ship and how to ship it the cheapest way, and follow up on the
Yeah,
returns, and somebody's not home and three signatures. All that stuff starts to play in, right? And you get to do
yeah,
that. So,
absolutely. Yeah. Oh, yeah. No, I know. And it's funny, like, during that whole time when it was really, really, intense and we were, in lockdown and all that, we did have to get creative when we had to pivot a little bit. And, we had to do, my dad is a wonderful people person and in person, is a wonderful conversationalist, but we had to say, okay, we need to record things now. And he gets it's not his strong suit and it's not mine either, to be honest. But these are things we had to learn to do in order to survive and in order to carry on. And it's just one more thing. And it's, like any small business, you need to do what you need to do, and it's hard work, and it's not all romantic and
you got to make a
opening
buck.
bottles of wine up.
You got to make a buck, and if you don't make a buck, then you don't make a buck. The wineries make a buck. How many cases are you guys making now?
We make about 5,000.
Well, that's kind of creeping up, and this is the sounds like what the 15th vintage or so, or what number of vintage is this?
Yeah, we are. I mean, we just picked our 22nd
Oh
harvest.
wow,
So
so okay,
yeah.
22.
Yeah, and we do Zinfandel under the Gamba brand, and then the 5,000 cases also encompasses, we have a sister brand called Etrusca Wines, where we do different blends, and we get to play with different varietals because Gamba is a Zinfandel brand. We want to remain synonymous with Old Vine Zinfandel, and so that 5,000 encompasses our sister brand as well. So like I said, growing and being creative, and it's part of the fun side of the job is to get to do that.
Any plans to bring from Italy some of your grandfather's, Nebbiolo or Arnese or some kind of, Barbaresco or something?
Yeah, I mean
Are you playing
that
with grapes?
so yeah, that I think that'd be incredible. My brother actually has really recently been getting into the farming side of things. He works he's a cellar worker now in Healdsburg, as well as a tasting host, and he loves Italian wines, and so it's really cool because he's recently kind of that spark has ignited within him, and so I could see him really taking on different things that probably would have been familiar to my grandfather, like you said, those Nebbiolos and things like that. So I think with my brother and sister and I starting to come into the business, I'm really excited because I think there's so much room and creativity to grow and to try new things. And so that's something that I see him kind of taking a lead on, which will be fun.
That's really fun that you get a chance to do that, experience that. I don't think I could work with my sister, so I don't know if that would work out anyway, even if we were passionate about it.
You know, Yeah, it's fun because, I work with my sister a lot for our Instagram, and it's great because, when you work with someone who's your friend, you don't feel like you can always be honest, but
Yeah,
we're
right.
always able to be honest with each other, but at the end of the day, I don't have any more fun with anyone else. So, it's fun. And, working with your family can be hard and in all aspects, everyone, but I think we all know what would be at stake if we didn't. So
It's an
it's
inspiring
worth it.
story, and we're already at 45 minutes if you can believe it. It's an inspiring story
That
for the.
flew by.
Yeah, thank you. I think that's a compliment from both sides, right? So,
There you go.
but it's an inspiring story because it's the model of it is one of the clearest messages I've gotten through, even with corporate owned wineries like Louis Jadot or something from Burgundy, and then all the way down to the small
Hmm.
houses, even with, like I mentioned, Tétanger. There's a certain humility to this industry that doesn't go that creates the difference between what you're doing and the Apothic Reds and the 19 Crimes of the world, and that is this
Hmm.
stewardship of the industry and the passion of the business and your land and your processes
Hmm.
and your name, and that
Absolutely.
you may or may not say it, you may not recognize it, you may or not, but you're passing through this opportunity. Your job is to leave it, and this is I get this from European winemakers all the time. Our job is to leave it better than when we got it, and expressing itself as what it is to the next generation. It's such an inspiring story. And when's the next
Yeah.
generation coming? Between your sister, you, and your brother. What?
Yeah. No, I mean, like I said before, I do feel as though, my brother, sister, and I have been given such a beautiful gift in this opportunity to continue in, what is such a dynamic and growing and, changing industry.
Mm-hmm.
And like exactly like you said, I think but all of us, as we have become older, have really realized that we do want to leave it better than we found it, and we found a very good thing. And so it's up to us to, just continue that. And I think it's an honor to do that. And, I think that I'm only excited for the future. I only see, good things coming for the future. We know so much more now. We do have something that, we can share with people. People are excited to learn. People want to know. And so it's just up to us to share that. And like you said, to be stewards. And, you know, I couldn't think of anything better.
Thank you so much for the time today. Do you have a tasting room, by the way, or how does the consumer find your
Yes.
wines?
Yes, so we are located in the Russian River Valley. We have a tasting room that's open by appointment. If you go to gambawinery.com, you can request a tasting there. We are also Gamba Vineyards and Winery on Instagram, and I am You Had Me at Bordeaux on Instagram.
You have me at Bordeaux. Big fan.
Thank
Thank you again for the time this morning. It's
you.
been an inspiring story and
Thank
very
you.
fun
This
to
has
hear.
been so much fun.
And I hope if you're in Los Angeles anytime, you come by for a taste. We have always something open around here, particularly on Tuesdays. And for
Absolutely.
sure, I have a podcast with Dave Stair from Dry Creek Vineyards to do, and so we'll be up that way one of these days, and we'll look you up.
Yes, please do. Please come visit us.
Thank you again.
All right. Thank you so much.
Cheers.